All right, let's dive into a topic that is absolutely foundational for every Muslim woman: the essentials of women's jurisprudence, or fiqh. Now, this isn't just some dry list of rules, not at all. It's a living framework that helps us understand how to worship God correctly and how to turn our day-to-day lives into a path of genuine service to Him.
So, to kick things off, I want you to think about this question. It kind of flips our usual thinking on its head. When a woman isn't praying during her period, is she missing out? Is that a spiritual loss? Or could it be that in that very act of not praying, she's actually performing an act of worship? This single question gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. So, first things first, we have to understand that this knowledge isn't just, nice to have. It is considered a sacred obligation. The term for this is fard ayin, which means it's an individual duty that falls on every single Muslim woman. But what makes it so important? Well, this slide really breaks down why it's such a big deal. On the most basic level, it's about making sure your worship is actually valid. Think about it. Praying when you're forbidden to is an act of disobedience, right? And of course, not praying when you're supposed to is a huge mistake. But it goes deeper. This knowledge moves you from just, doing what you were taught to a place of real conscious service to God. It gives you the wisdom to understand the why behind it all.
And this quote right here, wow, it really brings the point home for us today. The sources really stress that in our modern world, where we have information right at our fingertips, saying, "I just didn't know," isn't really a valid excuse anymore. We have a responsibility to actively seek out this essential knowledge.
Okay, so we've established why this is a duty. Now let's get into the two spiritual pillars that hold up all of these rulings. And those are intention and purity.
At the absolute core of everything we do is niyyah, or intention. This is the spiritual purpose behind what you're doing, and it's what gives an action its ultimate value. It's like a superpower, really. It can take the most boring, everyday task and transform it into a rewarded act of worship.
So how does that actually work? It's surprisingly simple. Take a look at this three-step process. You start with a normal act, something you do all the time, like cooking a meal. On its own, it's just a chore, a habit. But then you add a sincere intention. You think to yourself, "Ya Allah, I'm doing this to nourish my family for your sake." And just like that, the result, that simple act becomes worship. You can do this with anything, studying, working, you name it. And this brings us to an absolutely crucial point about purity, one that's often misunderstood. Islamic law makes a really clear distinction here. While certain things, like menstrual blood, are considered ritually impure and have to be washed away, the believer herself, as a person, never becomes impure. Her inherent essence is and always remains pure. That's a huge concept to grasp. Okay, with that foundation in place, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about the practical rulings when it comes to the core acts of worship during menstruation. What can you do? What can't you do? And how do you stay connected spiritually through it all? This table is a great at-a-glance summary. As you can see, both the daily prayers and fasting are forbidden during menstruation. But there is a key difference. The prayers you miss, you do not have to make them up. But the obligatory fasts you miss, like during Ramadan, those must be made up later. And when it comes to the mushaf, that's the physical Arabic copy of the Quran, it's forbidden to touch it directly without some kind of barrier. So if some acts are off limits, you might be asking, well, what can I do? And this is so important because the doors to worship are absolutely not closed. Far from it. You can see here, you can still engage in dhikr, which is the remembrance of God. You can read the Quran on your phone or tablet. You can listen to beautiful recitations. You can study translations. The restrictions are very specific to those formal ritual acts like the 5 daily prayers, fasting, and circling the Kaaba. Now, one thing that makes the study of fiqh so fascinating and sometimes a little complex is that there isn't always one single black and white answer. The major schools of Islamic law can have different interpretations, all based on how they read the primary sources. A perfect example is right here. How do you even define the length of a menstrual cycle? Well, it depends on the school of thought. The Hanafi school, for instance, sets the window between 3 and 10 days. But the Shafi and Hanbali schools say it's between 24 hours and 15 days. Meanwhile, the Maliki school doesn't set a minimum, but agrees on the 15-day maximum. And knowing these differences is key, because it determines when a woman needs to start praying again. And what about the time between cycles? Well, the vast majority of scholars agree on this number, 15 days.
This is considered the minimum period of purity, or tur, that has to pass between two separate periods. What this means is that any bleeding that happens inside that 15-day window is usually considered something else, like irregular bleeding, not a whole new cycle.
All right, let's bring this all full circle now. We've talked about rulings and timings and different scholarly opinions. But what is the ultimate point of it all? It all comes back to one single powerful concept: submission. I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? A woman's identity as a servant of God doesn't switch on and off. It doesn't depend on her physical state. Her worship just takes on a different form. She is worshiping when she performs the prayer, and, believe it or not, she is also worshiping when she obeys God's command to not perform the prayer. So here's the bottom line, the most crucial point. True service, true servitude, isn't about doing what we feel is worshipful. It's about submitting to what God has decreed for us. That means obeying the command to stop is just as deep and profound an act of worship as obeying the command to start. The goal is always submitting to His will, not our own. And that brings us to our final thought, something to really reflect on. We so often define worship by our actions, the things we do, the prayers we make, the fasts we keep. But how does our entire definition of worship change when we realize that true devotion can also be found in disciplined, intentional, obedient restraint? Something to think about.